investment, a significant return on investment by the end of phase 2. Because effectively what you will have done is you will have automated the process and taken a significant amount of cost out of that. And the other benefit is that once you've been through that process, you've effectively cleaned the data in your identity warehouse, because people have gone through to certify the business unit hierarchy in terms of who works for who, and also what access certification they should have. So you should, at the end of phase 2, have a clear view of who actually is accessing what within your business, and also you know who's certified that within your business. At the end of phase 2, we've really made managing access at the entitlement level as efficient as we can. So if we want to reduce our costs further, we need to find another way of moving away from managing at in the entitlement level. And that's where we start looking to use roles. So we talked about the IT department originally looking at managing maybe 1 million objects in order to determine the access rights within the business. If we can define the access rights for those 5,000 people in terms of a few hundred roles, then it's much easier for them to actually provision, deprovision access. And that's where we move on to phase 4. We actually use the roles that we've created within the business to then start provisioning and deprovisioning access. And again, that starts reducing cost, because as a manager, it's much easier to say whether somebody is working in Milan, they're working in finance, and they have management responsibility, rather than going down a list of all of the key applications in your business and saying which of those applications the individual should have access to. From an auditor's point of view, it's much easier to go in and validate that access controls are in place based on the roles, rather than looking at the individual entitlements for each person within the business. So we're starting to drive costs out of the business through the implementation of roles during phases 3 and 4 as well. Phase 5 is really the fruits of all of your labour, because by the time you get to phase 5, you should have management dashboards and a clear view of your risk position in terms of identity governance. And again, that puts you in a very strong position when it comes to auditing and things like that. Another area for confusion that I find is quite often people will have invested in a provisioning or identity management solution, and the question I get is, well, if I've just spent money on that, then why do I need a role management system as well? Our answer to that in terms of best practice is use your identity management system for doing the day-to-day management of access. So in terms of identity synchronization, provisioning, deprovisioning, all these sorts of things, use it in production as an engine for basically enforcing your access rules and policies. And those rules and policies, we would say, should sit within the identity governance solution. So your policies in terms of segregation of duty, your access certification, all these sorts of things should actually be sat separately from provisioning. And this is something that auditors are telling us they prefer as well, so that your identity solution sits in production and your identity compliance solution sits apart from the production environment, so that you can actually do proper auditing on the access that's going on within your business. And central to both of these is roles. And what we're looking to do is, within the identity analytics or the identity compliance software, we're looking to create and hold roles for the organisation, and those roles are then used by the provisioning solution in order to make sure that we're provisioning as efficiently and as cost effectively as we can. Now, we've started introducing the concept of roles. I made this mistake when I first joined Sun. I spent 45 minutes presenting and then somebody said, "What's a role?" So I thought I'd try and catch that now. This is my definition of a role. Hopefully you'll find it useful. The academics will give you a much longer one. But my view of a role is it's a collection of similar entitlements, attributes or objects that can be used to define access rights. Now, when we're talking about entitlements, purely all I mean is your access entitlement. So we've already talked about that. Attributes, an example of an attribute would be, say, the location where somebody worked, which may be also relevant to the role, and objects. Increasingly we're seeing people bringing objects into roles as well. So for example, you may decide that part of a sales role within your organisation is that you would provision a phone and a laptop and a security card to a sales individual who fulfills that role. So that's really the definition that I would offer you for what I'm talking about when we talk about a role. So what is Oracle's solution in this space? The Oracle solution is Oracle Identity Analytics. Some of you may have known it as Sun Role Manager. So ostensibly it is the same product. So if you know Sun Role Manager, then you know Oracle Identity Analytics as well. The technology is built very much around the identity warehouse. The advantage of this is that we can actually pull in information from a provisioning system. If you have a provisioning system in place, we can actually populate the identity warehouse with that. If you have an access management system, then we can pull that information in, and we can actually pull in pretty much any application that you're likely to have within your business as well. It's a very flexible piece of software in terms of the data that we can import. Now, touch wood, I haven't actually found an application yet that we have not been able to port into an identity warehouse. And that includes legacy applications that have been built in-house by some of our customers, some quite complex applications. As a general rule, if it has an access control log, we can pull it into the identity warehouse. The advantage of that is that it's not vendor specific, so we can bring in whatever we want. And in terms of the deliverables, the solution offers much more sophisticated dashboard and analytics around identity governance, much more so than provisioning or typical access management solutions. So if you are in an organization where compliance is particularly rigorous, then the level of detail that you can provide here will actually help you reduce the costs of external audits and things like that. Role analytics, another nice feature of the product is that once you've imported all of the access rights that you want to within your organization, you can then ask the software to suggest some roles. So you can either ask it to go and find every single user within your business that has the same access entitlements, or you can agree a level of risk that you're prepared to take as a business, and you might say, find me all the users that have 90% access rights in common, and it will then suggest candidate roles which you can review to understand whether they are appropriate for your business or not. Segregation of duty monitoring, this is obviously very key in terms of compliance, so the technology does that very well, and it will flag that and follow whatever process you decide to put into the workflow. And access certification, it can be very expensive to do access certification manually. So those are the key reasons why you might find this product of use. One of the other challenges that we have is, where do you start? There are a lot of examples of identity programs that started off very, very large and haven't worked. So my recommendation is that we get started with attestation. Attestation is the same thing as certification. So initially we just need to set up an agreement as to what's going to be within scope of our certification process. We need to understand who's going to review it, and we also need to understand how often we're going to do it. Some financial services organisations do it on a monthly basis, some on a quarterly basis, so we just need to agree that as a business. Once that's done, the reviewer for the certification is notified that there is a certification task that they need to complete. Now, because it's normally the business that is doing the certification, we try and make this as painless as possible. So, first of all, they're actually asked to certify whether somebody works for them or not. So we can actually clean the business unit hierarchy, because a manager will say, that person works for me, yes, they don't work for me, and they also have the ability to say that that person's left the company or they've moved into another team, so we can capture that. The second phase of the certification is that we send them the access entitlements that we believe each member of their team should have, and they can then go through it and fairly easily just identify whether that's correct, incorrect, or some further action should be taken.